Good afternoon. Anybody out there?
Good afternoon.
Hi, Jane, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I have a closing today. I'm very excited. Thanks for asking.
Yay, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Anybody have any storm damage from yesterday?
We had a
Not
branch that fell on
knowingly.
our swing set.
We had serious wind shears. Took out a huge limb in our yard. I was out there planting flowers in a pot. Next thing I know, huge wind gust, trees start falling apart. It's like, wow. It's like,
Well, you better get ready.
it's crazy. Crazy weather.
Ooh, crazy.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I'm allowing people to log in whenever they like. So what we're going to do today is talk about the various forms between what GLAR offers and what we have. And to get to them, you go into Weichert Works. Come on, let me in. To Office. To Documents. And this is everything that we have. Okay. There are packets in here. There's the condo listing sheet there. This is just a blank addendum page. So if you just need to write up an adjustment on, say, the purchase price because you're going to do in lieu of repairs or something, this is the addendum page that you can use for that. If they're going to buy the furniture separately from the house or the John Deere tractor, something like that, you can write it on here. Just make sure the lender doesn't see it. Sorry, background noise. The consumer guide to agency is here. This is probably going to change June 1, just so you know that it is supposed to be approved by the Kentucky Real Estate Commission the end of this month, and they're hoping to have it all printed and ready to go by June 1. As soon as GLAR starts using the new forms, we will too, including the new seller disclosure. And so this will change. But right now there's our agency agreement for buyers. It's identical to the one for sellers. This is a form I don't think a lot of people have seen. This is something I created years ago before we were even Weichert. I use this form in my file. It's nice to load everything into Weichert Works so you know where it is, and at the touch of a button you can go in and see the dates, etc. But this kind of keeps me on track because I'm old school and I like to look at it in writing. So it asks all the various questions: who's holding the deposit, when's the closing date, when's possession, who the lender is, inspection, whether or not they got a survey. So all of this information is right here at my fingertips. It also, at the bottom, as you can see, reminds me to tell them about the notification of insurance, utilities, and an address change. So this is just a one-pager. You're welcome to use it if you like. It's called the closing record. Next one, HOA doc. This is not a required form, but I think it's extremely important that you have this information in your file folder. And a lot of these forms are for that very reason, so that you can prove in the event you ever get threatened, for lack of a better way to put it, about not doing your job well. If you have all these forms in your file folder, it looks like you've made every effort to do it and to do it right. So this is also a reminder, because the GLAR contract does not specifically reflect the financial statements or the minutes of the meetings. This is a reminder to you that sometimes the minutes of those meetings are more important than anything else you're going to get from the homeowners association. And those minutes need to be shared with your buyers, because they have discussions about how they're spending money, or if they're having issues with a particular owner, or maybe there's a renter that's disruptive or something. These things will be reflected in the minutes of the meetings, and your buyers need to be aware of what's going on and what they're talking about in these HOAs. This doesn't necessarily have to be just for condos either. You can use it for the homeowners association for a subdivision, because the same would apply. If they're getting ready to pave the neighborhood, you want to know that they're discussing an assessment. This is the GLAR's addendum, and as you can see, it has homeowners association or condos. But again, it doesn't reflect the minutes, which is why I don't use this particular form. I think the minutes are really important. But notice under condominiums, it says if the document includes a first right of refusal, and this is hugely important because a lot of them still do in their bylaws require a first right of refusal, which is the homeowners association retains the right to buy back any unit in the development should they choose. So they have the first right to buy back that unit. They have to physically submit a letter that says they are not going to buy the unit, or the lender won't close on this condominium. So you make sure that you are looking for that, because you don't want that holdup at the end of the day and mess with your closing date. All right, I'm going to go close the other door now. Funny, I do this here because it's loud at my house with dogs. This is it. Y'all interrupt me too if you have any questions. Remember, I don't do the chat button, so just unmute yourself and ask me any questions you have. This is a document that was prepared by Pitt and Frank a long time ago, and I think people have forgotten that it exists. This is a really cool checklist if you're going to represent a condo seller. Even for a buyer, you might want to print this and just have it in your possession, because it asks all kinds of good questions. Property management company, it also reminds you to look on the deed to make sure that the parking space transfers with the condo. Sometimes these condominium associations will sell the parking spaces separately from the unit. Therefore, they would be two separate deeds. So you want to make sure that if you're buying a condo and it has a parking space or a garage, that it truly is being attached and sold with the unit. It needs to specifically be written in that way in the contract. It puts the closing attorney on notice that they better verify that they have the correct deeds to transfer ownership at closing. So this is a great checklist to make sure that you have all the answers to your questions. It asks if there are special assessments pending and if there are any lawsuits pending, because a lender will not lend on a condo if there is a lawsuit. The 1400 Willow has had an ongoing lawsuit for over 10 years. The lady who owns the penthouse unit there has a problem with windows and water leaking. And so she has a lawsuit against the homeowners association. Nobody in there is allowed to get a loan unless it's a private banking situation. But Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac will not insure that loan. Keep in mind that the listing contract is a 2-page listing contract, and it is separate from the input sheet. And this is a writable input sheet, so you can type on this if you'd like. This is going to be a different input sheet than the single-family residence, so be mindful of that. There's also one for vacant land. There's also one for farms and multifamily. So you want to make sure that you have the correct input form that coincides with the type of property that you're going to list. Condo seller certificate. Now we go round and round on this document. This is prepared by the Kentucky Real Estate Commission. Some lenders will require their own seller certificate to be filled out in order to process the loan. Technically, you should ask for this seller certificate when you list the property. The reason being is that it's going to answer all the questions as to whether there are special assessments, if anyone is in arrears on paying their homeowners association fees, any of the budget, bylaws, master deed, all of that is supposed to be included when you get this back. Here you can see at the bottom of the page, operating budget, the master insurance policy, the rules, restrictions, and bylaws, and then the plats and the plans, the budget. All of this is supposed to be included when they send it back. The law says that upon request, they have 10 days, the management company or the president of the association has 10 days to get it back to you. Some people are not playing by the rules. We've heard horror stories about some of this, but that is the law, and that's what you're supposed to do. Now, if you have this, I would put it in the documents on the MLS so that the other agents have access to it and know that all of these things have already been taken care of. If you list it today on the 11th of May and you don't sell it until December 15th, it is very likely that the lender will require an updated version of this questionnaire. And the reason being because somebody could fall into arrears between now and December 15th, and they need to know that the percentage of rentals versus owners is in line, that there is enough reserve cash on hand or they won't make the loan, that there aren't any assessments or pending lawsuits or they won't make the loan. So they're going to require an updated version of this. Our contract specifically states that anything above the initial request, which you would do at the time of listing, is the responsibility of the buyer and they pay for it. This is a great reminder when you're listing a condo that the homeowners association fee or the management company is going to charge the closing attorney a fee to verify that the owner is truly current in their HOA dues. That is a fee that can't be waived, and it is a fee that typically surprises sellers at the closing table. So this is a great reminder. Not only are you going to pay for this up front, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you are also going to pay to verify that you're current in your HOA right before closing, and that's going to show up on the closing statement. They're all going to go, I can prove it. I have check stubs, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. The management companies make their living off of all these little fees, and you aren't going to get around it. So just have the conversation up front with the seller when you are listing a condo. Any questions on the seller certificate? You do not fill this out. This is presented to the homeowners association or the president of the association, and the owner of the property should know who that is. All right. This is a document that was prepared by GLAR. I can't guarantee that all these numbers are still accurate, but it does have a lot of information about schools, pet licensing, driver's license, all the kinds of things that somebody moving into town might want to use as a reference. So that's been loaded in here for your convenience. And just make sure that if you're using it, that you present the caveat that I can't guarantee that it is accurate. It's a government produced document. This, of course, the contingency of sale, we just went through this last week. Here it is. So again, you might want to just download this one and save it on your computer so that you don't have to go find it every time you need it. But that's the contingency of sale. There is a COVID-19 addendum in the event that you want to use the one that was created by GLAR. There it is. I'm not going to load all the various ones. KREC has one, the Kentucky Realtors has one, Indiana has one. I don't really care which one you use, and I don't really care if you use one at all. That's up to you and your clients to decide. I'm not going to dictate how that is handled, but it's here in the event you want to use one. I suppose anything's better than nothing, but again, I'm going to leave that up to you. The limited dual agency, this is for buyers, and this is an old form. That needs to go away. Sorry. I will take that one down because we have addressed that in both the buyer and the seller agency agreements. And this is a duplicate. The early possession and early occupancy is the exact same document. This is worthy of discussion. As a listing agent, I would be very, very hesitant to allow a buyer to move into my listing prior to closing. And that's the conversation I'd be having with my seller. Very hesitant. As a buyer's agent, I'm all about it. I know that's kind of confusing, but I'm representing the buyer, and if they want to move in early, I have this agreement that I can execute and present to the other agent. I have been in receipt of a couple of these possession agreements, and they're one-pagers, and they don't really cover very much. This one I think is better. If I'm not mistaken, this one was written by Borders and Borders about 10 or 15 years ago. It's going to identify a good faith deposit. It's going to identify insurance on the property. If there is a fee involved, what happens if the furnace breaks while they're in the property, that kind of thing. So if you're representing a buyer, I'm all about early possession. If you're representing the seller, I'd be very, very nervous about allowing a buyer to move into the seller's property. If the buyer defaults and cannot close, and of course in this climate right now, that's a real strong possibility. So I would be very hesitant to allow a buyer to move into a house. If you have to, I would do it in the form of a lease agreement, not an early possession agreement. Either one is going to require an eviction in the event the buyer doesn't perform. And right now, the government has stopped evictions. The courts aren't open. You are stuck with a tenant, and they don't even have to pay. So I would be really hesitant about going down that path with this. If you are going to do a lease option, which these may come back around as people are kind of scrambling to get rehired and build up a little more money and things like that due to this pandemic we've been doing, never confuse the two. A purchase agreement should always be completely separate from a lease agreement. They should not talk to one another. They should not be in the form of one document. You can execute a lease agreement that states upon termination or expiration of this lease agreement, the buyer will perform per the specifications in the purchase contract. So it's a trigger that once they have finalized their lease agreement, it automatically reverts to that second document, but the two don't commingle, especially money. I would never take a part of the rent and put it towards the down payment. That's a really hard thing to separate, to dissect. It should be completely separate. If you get into a situation where you're going to do a lease purchase, please talk to me or to Bill before you ever sit down and execute a contract, or call an attorney and let them draft one for you. But don't commingle the two. Bless you, whoever that was. Earnest money deposit form. This has come up a lot, and the privacy part of the good faith deposit basically states that if you're going to share any private information of your client, that you have to do it with their written permission. So to provide somebody a copy of the good faith deposit is going to require written permission of your seller. I'm of the opinion I would prefer not to do that. I'm of the opinion that it makes more sense to me to write this document and send it to the other agent. And it is merely proof that you have received it. Here's the listing address. The deposit was received on such and such date, the buyer's name. I would not put the full address on the check, but you can, so that they can see that Joe Smith lives on Alton Road, you might do that. And then of course who the listing agent is. And then if the staff is going to collect the check, or you or whomever, it needs to have that name on there. I would highly suggest this gets put into Weichert Works, because from there you can just email it to the other agent, and that will suffice as proof that you have received the document, because otherwise it would be fraud. If you filled this out and you had not received the check, it's fraud. You're signing a document that's not true. If you have any questions.
It needs to have the amount on it.
Okay. All right. You're right, it does. I will fix that. Jesse, if you're on here, will you make a note of that? Jesse's not on here.
What
Okay.
about, okay, I see it, never mind.
All right, I'll work on that. I have had a lot of pushback from other agents. I actually had a guy call me from EXP and said he couldn't get paid without a copy of that check. I called my friend Stephanie Gillison, who owns EXP, and explained it to her. She agreed with me that that's old school and not required, and that this document suffices perfectly. So if you have any trouble at all, just call me. I'm glad to make that phone call on your behalf, but I will add the dollar amount to that form.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is the document that we use to put a copy of the check on. This is the document you do not share with anyone else, because of course it has the private information on it, but I have to have a copy of it. I have to have a copy of the check, because without that, Bill spends 30, 45 minutes sifting through hundreds of escrow deposits trying to find a name. And invariably an agent's going to say, well, yeah, it was Joe Smith. No, it wasn't. It was T. Joe Smith. So it was under T, not J. And he spends 30 to 45 minutes looking for a check that he could have readily found had he just had a copy of it, because when he sees it, that's how it's entered into the system. Then, of course, it goes to the bank, so he doesn't have it anymore. That's why the copy is so imperative. So make sure you have a copy of the check somewhere. It doesn't have to be on this form, but I've got to have a copy of the check. And then when you are requesting your good faith, you are doing it through Jennifer, because Jennifer writes the checks. Bill doesn't write the checks, Jennifer writes the checks. So good faith deposits are requested through Jennifer. Any questions on that?
No.
Cool. The fair housing brochure is on here. And I don't know if anyone has noticed, but I switched up the packets because I kept finding that when people were recycling the packets, that these forms were in them. This is a $10,000 fine, go to jail, do not pass, go. Fair housing is mandatory, folks. You have to give your clients this document. So it is now the very first one in both the listing contract and the purchase contract. You must give out this form. A lot of companies make a client sign off on the fact that they've received it. I hate to have them sign yet another form because they signed so much stuff already. But if that's going to have to be how it is, then maybe we'll switch it up. But please make sure that you have plenty of these in your car so that you can hand them out and then make a note that you did so. We got to make sure people are having that. This is an old form too. This is a farm addendum, and I left it in here. I don't know that GLAR even has it on their website any longer, but I thought it was really cool because it addresses things that are not in the body of the purchase contract. So if you are going to represent the buyer of a farm, this is a great cheat sheet to use. If you don't actually sell a lot of farms very often, and say, for example, you have somebody that's looking for a place to put their horses, keep in mind that soil samples are hugely important when you are representing a buyer choosing a property for horses, because we have a very wet soil here, and they are susceptible to hoof rot. So if you don't have a soil sample done on the property, you could be setting up your poor buyer to fail by ruining their horses. So if you're representing a farm, make sure you talk to me about it if you're not comfortable on all the things you need to include on that. This is one example of an FHA mandatory clause. They have a whole lot of them. There's all different kinds. Lenders have their own sometimes. They used to not allow electronic signatures, but the last few I've done have been electronic, which is really helpful. But remember that you must use this in any FHA loan. Some lenders are letting you do it at closing. That's really unusual. It's supposed to be done at the time the purchase contract is executed. In fact, several other states have the FHA mandatory clause built into the body of their contracts so that there's no misunderstanding about having this executed. So if you haven't received one, or you want to submit one with your offer, there's not to say that the lender won't require one on their own form, but at least you've had the conversation with the buyer and the seller and they know that it's coming, because it's kind of hard to explain when you've gotten through the entire process. You're a week away from closing and all of a sudden the seller's going, what's this form? And you forgot to mention it. So don't forget that this FHA mandatory clause is mandatory for any FHA loan. This is the floodplain document that is in your packet now. And remember that the floodplain certification is determined on every single transaction in the country. Every house sold is going to have a charge on the closing disclosure for doing a flood certification. So there's no reason for you not to do one too. Most of the houses are going to come back to be in the zone X. X does not require flood insurance. So if you get one that comes back and it says it's in zone X, you're in great shape. The other beautiful thing about this and doing it on every single house that you are doing, whether it's a listing or a purchase, is that it's not just FEMA. As you can see, this is MSD. It's going to look at the FEMA floodplain map, but it's also going to take into consideration the runoff, the drainage easements, the low-lying areas that typically flood that aren't on the FEMA map. There are certain areas in town where MSD is going to deem it to be in a floodplain, and it could affect getting a permit to add on to your property. It could affect you renovating a property. So you want to make sure that you have the determination not just from FEMA, but from the local authority as well, which would be MSD. When we were talking about this in a class last week, I actually filled one in and filled one out and sent it in. On the form, it usually says allow for 48 hours to get it back. I got it back before the meeting was over. So it's pretty quick.
And that is for Jefferson County, correct? Does that apply to Oldham County as well?
That's a great question. MSD has taken over parts of Oldham County. It could be that, no, it just says Jefferson. Yep, it's just Jefferson. There is a link on the MLS for the Oldham County version of Logic, which probably has floodplain on it. I can't remember because I haven't been there in a while, but you might play with that link and see if you can get the floodplain information from there. If nothing else, definitely FEMA. Go to the FEMA map and type in the address and it'll show you exactly what the zone is.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You can also call them.
Call Oldham County.
Yeah, 222-1476.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Mm.
This is the release of contract contingency. I don't think anyone ever uses this. There are times when you're going to want the contingency released. Usually, if I am writing a separate addendum that is not on a GLAR form, Sometimes we'll go back and forth so much on an inspection repair request that it winds up being on that first page that I showed you, the addendum page. And I will write in there, upon written agreement, this shall release whatever contingency it is, the home inspection contingency, and all parties agree to proceed toward closing. So it says it right here. Said contingency is hereby released and all parties agree to proceed toward closing. So if you don't want to write it out, and you shouldn't be writing it out because that's kind of construed as practicing law, here is your general release of contract contingency. So say it's contingent upon the husband who's been stranded out in California for a month because of COVID. He wants to come and view the property, and you've allowed him until a certain date to approve or disapprove of the house. You might want to get it in writing and use this release of contract that the property address right there, and then the contingency and paragraph, which would be other pages on, or other provisions on page 6, or the addendum if there was one attached. And then you can say, the husband hereby releases his contingency with regards to viewing the property, and all parties agree to move forward to closing. So that's in there if you need it. The getting to know you is in there. I'm not going to go through that. I'm pretty sure there's the other one that I did. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is for buyers, and I don't know why it says. Yeah, for buyers. Sorry, confusing myself. Buyers needs assessment. So this is a great tool to use because it's going to ask them if they're currently in a lease, and that's really important. If you are renting, you better know the expiration date of that lease. Because if you set them up to fail, like I've got one right now, their lease isn't up until September. We're going to close on their new house in June. But they're cool with that. They want plenty of time to make it like they want it, and then they'll be out before September 1. That's a long time. But some people can't afford to pull off paying a mortgage and rent at the same time, so don't set them up to fail. Previous realtor use, sometimes it's really good to ask that question. We've had it happen recently in this office where buyers have jumped ship, and you could very well be working with a buyer who jumped ship from some other realtor, and you don't want to wind up in a procuring cause issue. So asking them if they've used a realtor in the past could be very helpful. And if they say yes, ask them when the last time was they talked to them. The graph, no one's using this because nobody's measuring their house, but if you truly want to play with it, here it is. It's every 2 feet is a grid, and you can draw out the house and calculate the square footage on this graph. Even if you just want to attempt to do it, somebody needs to mute. Got a lot of background noise. The graph is a great tool for you to practice. If you're going to pay for Melissa's brother to go out and measure the house, measure it too, and then compare notes with what his calculations come up with and yours. And it may be that you get so good at it down the road after having done it several times, your confidence goes up and you can save the $75 and measure the house yourself. Typically, the only time I would hire Matt to come out and measure houses if it's just a really convoluted floor plan with a lot of angles and 3-story house and multiple room additions, whatever, then I might do it. But for a typical box ranch, there's no reason you can't pull a tape on that. I'm glad to help you. If you just call me, we'll go do it together. I've got no problem with that. And then if you put it on the graph paper, you know that it's squared up, and you have to be within 10%, which is a pretty good swing. And if you have made the attempt and you have made an error and somebody finds fault with you, at least you can prove to them you tried, rather than going to the PVA and then checking other on the box. So that's what that's there for. I think this is in here twice. Yeah, this is the newer addendum for homeowners association. So if you want to use that one, this is not for condos. This is strictly for houses, but this is to verify all of the information with regards to the homeowners association. And this has come up a few times lately as well. I don't remember who it was. Somebody was looking for property and they wanted to have chickens, and they got under contract. I think it was Deirdre. And it specifically said that you couldn't have chickens in that neighborhood. So this could really save you. it would be horrible if you set your buyer up to fail because they wanted to build a barn to house their RV, and the rules and restrictions specifically prohibit that. So making sure you have this under control is really important, and there's a document for it, and then everyone signs off on it, so it takes the onus off of you. Anytime you get homeowners association bylaws, rules, restrictions, I highly suggest you don't read through them and then explain it to your client. You give all of the documents to your client and let them read through it. The easiest way to handle making sure your buyer is comfortable is by giving them the phone number of the person in charge who can answer all their questions. Can I rent? Can I put in an RV? Can I have chickens? Can I have a dog? How many dogs? Let the buyer ask all the questions, and it takes the onus off of you. This is our wire transfer document. This is in your packet. If you don't have a complete packet or it's missing, here it is. Again, this is a safety net for you to make sure that they understand that we will never ever request information with regards to a wire transfer, and that it's a good conversation to say, if you're going to do a wire transfer, you call the attorney's office. You don't give them information from when they call the client. The client should call the attorney's office so they know they are the ones that made the phone call and they're talking to somebody who's truly a representative of that particular closing office. It's unfortunate that we have to go down that road, but hugely important. I'm old-fashioned. I'm all about that paper money. I'd just as soon have that check in hand and take it to the bank. Great opportunity to have a conversation with your seller. If they are not going to buy another house, they're not taking that check to go to another closing and purchase another house, that check typically is not going to be cashed for maybe 5 days. Most banks say 7, some might say 10. But if they need that money right away, you might have the closing attorney issue 2 checks. One that's not a very high amount, maybe $2,500, that they can go to the bank and cash today so that they have some money. I've had this happen in the past where the seller didn't have enough money to pay for the moving truck. That's how tight things were. So we cut 2 checks at the closing. One, so she could, put it in the bank and wait for that money to season or whatever. And the other, she took as a smaller check so that she could cash it and pay the moving van. So just think outside the box. It's the little things that we do like that are going to set you apart because it shows you actually care about your client. So all of these forms are to keep you safe, keep your clients safe. But also, if you do it right, it's really proving that you care about what you're doing in the transaction from start to finish.
Oh, and one thing I've learned though about the money, some banks will let you go on and have your funds available to you immediately if you want to pay them 10% of what that check amount is.
Holy cow, what a ripoff.
Yeah.
This is the listing sheet for vacant land. As you can see, it's very different from a normal listing contract. So that is not going to go on your residential input form. Lead-based paint, I don't think we need to. Oh, yeah, I do need to go through this. It's kind of weird the way it's laid out. It's a federal document, but the seller is supposed to initial by A and also by B. And I'm seeing some come through the office where they're not initialed. And I typically will, when I'm sitting down with my client, I will take my pen and check the second box where it says seller has no knowledge, and I will check seller has no reports under B. And I'll look up at him and say, I'm certain that you've never had this tested, correct? And of course, I look at you like you have 4 eyes, like tested for what? Lead paint? Nobody does that. And then obviously, if you haven't tested, you're not going to have any records or reports. So I'm making sure that the correct boxes are checked. I'm doing that for them, and then they initial. Because I don't want them to check the wrong box and then some agent come back and say, oh, you have lead-based paint? Let me have the report. So the box was checked wrong. The buyer always has to check D, and you better have a slew of lead-based paint booklets in your car. Everyone's supposed to have a copy, buyer and seller, and they need to have received the pamphlet. They're all going to give it right back to you. That's fine, but you have to give it to them, and they have to initial that that has happened.
I have a question.
They don't initial C unless they've received copies of information. There's no information to provide. So C is blank. Yes, your question.
So D is that only applicable, Allison, to things built before 1978 or just across the board period?
No, in 1978 or before.
Right, but okay, so if it's after 1978, we're okay, right? We
Right.
don't have, okay,
Correct.
gotcha.
Correct.
Okay.
And then E must be initialed. So the buyer is always going to initial D, the buyer is always going to initial E, and they're either going to do their 10-day opportunity or they're going to waive their opportunity. Check the appropriate box. This is a government document. It's not something you can fool around with, so let's make sure it's done correctly. Agent's acknowledgement, the agent has informed the seller of their obligation and is aware of responsibility to ensure compliance. So you need to sign it as well, initial right there. And then the buyer's agent, the listing agent, and all the parties are going to sign this document, and then everyone has to have a copy. And again, thank you, Donna, it's for houses in 1978 or before. This is a walkthrough inspection. No, this is the lease. Sorry. This is the new lease that GLAR just redid as of this year. That's good. We got the new one in here. I was on the task force that actually wrote this, so I like this lease. It's a pretty straightforward lease. I would highly suggest that if you have somebody that's requesting a lease, you can give it to them. I'm okay with that. I don't want anyone in here to be doing property management. It is a whole lot of liability. It is completely different than residential real estate. Everyone hates a property manager. If you have any questions with regards to leases, you need to talk to Bill or to me or to an attorney before you're given any advice with regards to a lease agreement. But if you have somebody that has a house that they want to lease and they're going to manage it themselves, I don't have no problem with you sharing this, although it's going to say you can't. It's all right by me. Listing contract, I don't need to go through that. Listing sheet. This report says mandatory, and nobody does it. It really is imperative that this is filled out. This information is required in Weichert Works, so the staff really needs to see all of this information. And I have no interest whatsoever in following up with any of your clients. I am not going to reach out to any of your clients without your permission, but it is a requirement in Weichert Works that I have contact information for buyers and sellers. There have been a handful of times since we've owned our company where the agent in a transaction has wound up in the hospital or for whatever reason had an emergency, and we have to be able to find the people involved in the transaction. So this is really imperative that you fill this out. It has the little box up here that says if you want to do the follow-up program, you can check there, but I highly suggest you look for the form when you turn in your closing statement. There should be a form at every staff's desk so that you can fill that form out, and then they will get it to me, and it's my responsibility to get the client follow-up into the system, and then I give a copy of that invoice to Bill so that he can charge you for it, and you get a copy of it to prove it's been done. So,
Okay, Allison,
yep.
it's Vicky. Excuse me. So I've been checking that box, but I have no way of knowing, nor have any of my clients ever called and said, hey, I got the neatest little thing from you or whatever. And sometimes not only do I do it for the buyer who's moving in, I just assumed if I wrote extra, like now I want my seller who's going somewhere else to start getting this, that's okay, right?
I don't care where it sends, but if I don't have an address, I can't put it in the system.
I got, excuse me, I
Sound
got
like
it.
me.
I'm sorry, I'm not really got COVID or anything.
You sound like me.
It's just wild this morning. So anyway, let's say that I want my buyer to get one, and maybe I had of my own buyer. So sorry. Or I wanted the new buyer who I didn't represent to start getting this.
Yeah,
And
just turn in the sheet. Just
Huh?
fill out the sheet with the information.
Right, but I've never
just-
seen the sheet you're talking about, other than I just draw an arrow up there at the top or way underneath and say, I want this one and that one and their addresses to get it, but I've never seen that other sheet you're talking about.
Because it's brand new.
Okay, good.
Because nobody was checking the box, or no, the staff didn't know what to do with that box. And
Okay.
all along I had thought Michael had this under control, and none of it got done. And of course, then he
Okay.
was out of the office for several months.
Sure.
And so nobody knew what was going on. So the staff
Okay.
is now aware of it. And because that box gets overlooked, we created a form.
Okay,
I actually have one for you. Somebody filled it out for Angela and Dakota Brown.
yes, there are should be two different addresses there.
Nope, just one.
Well,
31 Plainview Court, Milton, Kentucky.
yeah, and on anyway, we won't argue about it right now, but there were two because the mother bought the house for Dakota, and I wanted the mother to also start getting something.
Send me an email. Send me her
I'll do
name and her address, and I'll make sure it gets done.
Okay, I'm getting ready to go show property, so I'll do it.
Okay, well, if Michelle has the information, call her and tell her to do it.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
All right. So going back to this sheet, it's really important that we're filling it out. I got to know all of this stuff. I need to know if it's going active under contract. I need to know if it's going into pending. If it's contingent, this is important. If it's contingent upon the sale of a property, the staff is going to know not to put it active under contract. I don't want to do a disservice to your seller. So please make every effort to fill it out to the best of your ability. And then down at the bottom, how did you get this listing is really important. And if there is a referral to be paid to somebody, I need to know this as well, especially if it's a Weichert Lead Network, because they track it like there's no tomorrow. And if you forget to put it down here, then I've got to chase you the next closing to get that money back that we have to pay to Weichert. So if you're not telling me that there's a referral fee in here, it gets really ugly. So please make sure you're executing that document properly. We've been through this form. We just did this class, but this is the release of the contingency of sale on the buyer's property. They either got tired of trying to sell their house and they just want to move forward and buy the other one, or they have a contract on their house and they're ready to move forward. So this is the notification of release of the contingency on the sale of the buyer's property. So that's in there. There's your repair request document. This is the 2-pager from GLAR. I'm perfectly fine if you want to use this one. There are others that I created in our file drawers as well. There's the notification from the seller to the buyer that another offer has been conditionally accepted. And then the buyer has the right to respond. They can void the contract. They can prove that they have the ability to purchase without selling, or they have a contract on their house. So they check the appropriate box there. We just did that class. Office exclusive listing form. This is the new one from GLAR. I'm hoping. Yes. This is the new one, and the seller must sign it. So what this does is it's prohibiting those people who were taking listings and not putting them on the MLS, and they were not requiring a signature from the seller that says they didn't want it on the MLS, because now with the clear cooperation that was effective May 1, you have 24 hours from the effective date on the listing to put it in the MLS. So that's what this is for. Here is the one-time showing agreement. And this has been a discussion among several people. I know there are a lot of agents in our offices that would never show a property without this being signed. I can go both ways on this. I'm of the opinion if the buyer doesn't want to work with me anymore, the last thing I want to do is to have to break a contract like this. If a buyer chooses not to work with me anymore, it's probably for the best, because it probably would have wound up being ugly at the end of the day. So I love the fact that the buyer has the right to choose their representation, and if they move on and buy from somebody else, more power to them. But again, if you want to ensure that you are going to get paid for your efforts, then you may want to use this document. I'll leave it up to you if that's what you choose to do, which is why we have included it on the backside of Weichert Works. Your open house preparation list. This is a cheat sheet for all the things that you can do, and it's 3 pages long. So if you want to do it the Weichert way, this cheat sheet has been loaded in here for your use. This one, hugely important document. If there isn't any other document you pay attention to today, this is the one. There are contingencies in the contract. You do not have to do all of the contingencies. However, if you choose not to exercise your rights that are in the purchase contract, I really want you to sign off on it that we've had the discussion. I've suggested that you do these things. And if you don't want to, it's perfectly fine by me. You don't want to have an appraisal? Fine, check the box. You don't want a survey? Fine, check the box. You don't want a home warranty, you don't want to verify the square footage, you don't want a home inspection or a pest inspection or a radon inspection or a septic inspection or a walkthrough or other contingency. That's a big one. Other contingency. And I'm telling you right now, there are times when I'm looking at houses going, man, I'd have a chimney guy look at this, no question about it. And they say, no, I'm perfectly fine with the home inspector. I'd write that in there and have them sign off on it because that's going to be a $10,000 fix at the end of the day and they didn't bother to have it checked. The other one that's come up that's a big deal right now are air sample tests. They are checking for mold, good, bad, or ugly. If you are being savvy and you, especially with a house that has a crawl space, I'd highly suggest a mold test. Jay Kraft does them. I know there's several people in town that will do them. Jerry Parker is one of them. But I would certainly write it in, especially if it has a crawl space, that you have suggested it, and if they don't want it, they need to sign off on the opt-out form. And
I
then
have
you
a
sign it. Yeah.
Sorry, Allison, I hate to interrupt you that way. So I was in a basement the other day in Forest Springs, and they had a radon thing in there. You know, one that looked like it was built with the home.
Yep.
And there was like a gauge, like, you know, documentation, like a sticker on it and everything.
Right.
So can you speak to that? I mean, you know, I was unfamiliar
Yes.
with it. I knew what it was, and I know
Yes.
about mitigating, you know, on homes that weren't built that way, but maybe you could touch on that. Thanks.
Yes. The radon mitigation systems are very simplistic. All they really are is a fan that is pulling the radon gas from under the foundation and pushing it up through a PVC pipe to the exterior. The little thing you're talking about, that gauge on that PVC pipe, should usually be red. It has liquid in it, and it should be in the shape of a J. If it's in the shape of a J, it's showing that the suction is working very well. If it's in a U, where the left and the right are even, it's not sucking any of the gas out anymore, or it's unplugged.
So here's my question, and that was exactly the way you described it. Okay, so their question to me was, you know, in the contract, do they want to have a radon test? What do you do when someone asks you, okay, like that's there and it all looks good? Should they go on and pay for another separate inspection? I mean, that's just a question.
It's a great question. And
Okay.
the question then becomes, is it doing its job adequately? If the house has a crawl space somewhere else, or it has a separation, whether it's doors or whatever, it could be that it isn't getting all the radon out of the house properly.
I
So-
took a picture of it, and you know, that was the question, like, okay, Donna, do we do this or not? And
Okay,
I'm
now
like,
wait, you're missing my point. Just because it's in the shape of a J and it's showing that the suction is pulling the radon out properly because of the suction level doesn't necessarily mean that the radon level won't still be over 4.
it was under 1. It had the reading on there. I'm just, you know, I mean,
It had the reading on the sticker on the PVC pipe?
no, that little red thing that you're talking about, it was like a thermostat, and it measured it. It was, I'll send it to you and you can take a peek.
Yeah,
It
that is not going to determine the level of the picocuries of the radon in the air in that basement.
So we heard, okay, so you're suggesting that should be their call, right? And
Yes.
okay.
Just
Okay.
because it looks like the pump is sucking the gas out properly because it's in the shape of a J, doesn't necessarily mean that the radon level isn't still higher than 4,
Gotcha. Okay.
right?
Hmm.
Good question. All right, we cool on this? Good form, helpful, save your life. Pink slip has actually been replaced, but I'll still accept it. This is where you're going to do a price change, cancellation, extension. You can use this pink slip. Frankly, folks, if your seller sends you an email that says they want a price change, they want to extend the listing, they want to cancel the listing, because of this new law, if it's in writing and the email counts, it's legit. It's no different than a contract. So I'm not so worried about having somebody sign this necessarily. If they'll just shoot an email, so I have their email address on it, I know it's legit, and that's perfectly fine by me. So you don't have to go through the hoops of having that pink slip signed. The referral agreement, this is in here in case you want to send a referral to some other office around the country. This is at, you know, you're going to have the broker sign it for sure, because the broker is the one that's going to be paying the fee. Agents don't do fees, brokers do. So if you're going to do a referral, make sure that the other agent's broker has signed it and that your broker has signed it. I can sign it, Bill can sign it, Jane can sign it, but it needs to be signed by a broker, because the brokers are the one that exchange money, not agents. But you need to have it in writing. This, I think, is hugely important. Don't do this one in just an email. If it's not signed by the broker didn't authorize to pay you, and so your email isn't going to suffice. Make sure you're using a proper agreement. Here's my request for repairs. This is the ABG one. It's a lot more simplistic, and this needs to be changed as well. It says paragraph 17. I will fix that. Paragraph 10. Okay. Input form, there's the residential purchase contract, the sales report, there's the seller consultation, and this is the Weichert one. So, nope, I think that was mine actually. So if you want to take that with you and talk to the seller, ask them questions about their house, you can take that. There's the seller disclosure, which again will be changed June 1st. The seller information sheet. Now, more than ever, this is going to be a really important one. You have got to have the courage, especially now, to make sure that you're having a conversation with your sellers that they're current on their mortgage. I can see a repeat of 2008 where sellers are in denial and they're going to tell you that they missed maybe 1 or 2 payments. But what they don't understand is that when you miss 1 or 2 payments, they put those payments on the end of your loan and they're going to charge you fees and interest. Now, it's kind of up in the air as to how that's all going to fall out after this particular crisis. What I'm reading is all banks are a little bit different on how they're going to handle that. But again, I go back to, if you aren't privy to this information and know where they stand, if somebody says to you that they have missed a payment or 2, you need to call and get a payoff so that you actually understand how much money they owe. The article in the Wall Street Journal, well, first of all, there was a letter to the editor in the Courier Journal talking about how they were imploring the governor to just stop rent payments rather than having to repay these rent payments when this is all said and done. They just want to erase them, which basically sets up homeowners to fail, because a lot of people have mortgages on their property and they're counting on the rent income to cover the mortgage. So without rent being accepted, now you're setting these people up to miss payments on their mortgages, which might end up in a foreclosure situation. So this information is going to be really important, that you understand where these people fall with regards to their loan balances. Also, if they have a second. And people don't understand that an equity line of credit is a second. That's why it's written on here, equity. make sure you're saying that word. It's not just a second mortgage. Ask them if they have an equity. I can't tell you how many people over time have said, oh, I'm just going to transfer that equity balance to my new property. That's not how it works. It's very unusual that they could pull that off. They may get another equity, but they're going to want their money when the house is sold. So make sure you have all of this information. You're going to ask them if they're current on their homeowners association fees for the subdivision and also the condo, and that they have paid their tax bills. So use this form. It's in there for a reason. And I can't tell you how many times in the last 2 years we've had agents come in and say, holy cow, I had no idea this was going to be a short sale. The form's here. If you'll just ask these people, it would be really helpful. Remember that the purchase contract specifically states if the seller can't give clear title at closing, the seller gets to reimburse the buyer for all of their expenses. And we had one in here where the expenses exceeded $36,000. Well, if the seller can't sell their house because it can't give clear title, they probably don't have the $36,000 to give to the buyer either. So ask the questions, show you care. And the way I present this form is, the last thing I want to do is set you up to fail. If we're going to enter into a contract, you have to be able to perform. And I am on your team. I'm here to help you achieve your goals. Let's make sure that we have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed. I need to know if you're current on your mortgage.
One
This
more
would be
thing.
good. This would be good to have this done kind of early on with your package versus going through the whole thing and you pull that last document out there and then you find out that they're just taking bankruptcy.
Sometimes people have prepayment penalties on the loans too, right, Allison?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. That factors in big time if
Yeah.
that's a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on that equity.
Could that be in there? I mean, could that be somewhere along the like the loan type conventional and all that? Could that be added, or is that something we should just bring up? I know it's rare, but it does exist.
It's going to be rare, and frankly, it's only going to come up on an equity. I know Republic Bank was doing it for a while on their adjustable rates, but I haven't heard of anyone having an adjustable rate loan in so long that I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Gotcha.
All right. Here is the post-possession agreement for a seller that's going to stay in their property after closing. If I am representing the buyer, I am sure as heck going to want this if they're staying any longer than a couple of days. They want to stay for 2 weeks or a month. This is a mini lease agreement. And so I would want this signed. So keep in mind that this is here if you need it. If I am representing the seller and they want to stay for a couple of weeks, I might just, out of the kindness of my heart and to try to keep all of this on a level playing field, have my seller sign it and give it to the buyer's agent before they ask for it. It's protecting everybody. This is a newer form that we just created. This is talking about the home warranty, that you can list a house and have a home warranty while the property is being actively marketed. And I have heard horror stories about sellers suing realtors because they didn't mention that they could have that coverage during the time of listing. So this is sort of your CYA document that says, we suggest you have one. If you don't want one, it's not a problem. You can check no, but at least you can prove you've had the conversation, and remind the sellers that they don't pay for it until they go to the closing. Same with termite inspections. It's worked for Jane, it's worked for me, where we did the termite inspection up front. We loaded the termite report on the MLS. The buyer saw it. They didn't order their own. And my termite report, which is perfectly legit, I had it done by Bright Pest Control. They did a full-blown termite inspection and said, no, it does not need to be treated. And we went with it. The problem lies with the fact that the new rule says it is up to the termite company to determine whether or not they think there should be treatment recommended. And there are a few companies that are going to take advantage of that, and they're going to recommend it every single time unless you can prove you've got a warranty right now in place on your listing. So I am all about telling the seller about this up front, and make sure you say, this is not a warranty. I can't guarantee that the buyer isn't going to hire their own pest inspector. But given the fact that the buyer is spending so much money on all these various inspections, saving $50 or $60 on a pest inspection might be something they'd be willing to do. As long as I have a legitimate one that's good for 45 days, I think it's perfectly fine to do this. But having the conversation up front, that way they're not blindsided when they get that report back that says, no, there's no evidence, but because you don't have a warranty, we want $1,000 to treat your house for termites. They're going to pitch a fit. So have the conversation.
Also on that, there's not a bunch of upselling going on when the next company comes out that starts with BD to do other things, you know, like landscaping and all
Right.
the other things that they're capable supposedly of doing. I just had that. With them, and it's like, you know, and thank goodness we had a structural report and all of that already in place.
Good.
Which is done in September of 2019. So all the stuff basically, there was about 4 lines of information, and the rest was CYI liability documents standard. And I mean, over 3/4 of a page was that part.
Wow.
So be really clear on who it is that you're choosing. And see, these home inspectors, they have their own little crew of people. So I need to be clear with the home inspectors to go, you know what? When you're working for my client, I would prefer, if you're going to go a route of the pest inspection company, whoever it is, that, you know, you go down this road, or we call this person or whatever, because
Right.
you have to be careful on that. And
That's a
speaking of,
really good point. Really good
yeah.
point. Be proactive. If your buyer is hiring an inspector and you don't know that inspection company, call and ask, who do you use for your termite inspections?
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
often than not, they're going to say, who do you want me to use?
Yeah. I did not know it until it was too late.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, one other question. Do you know anybody who will do pest inspections on log cabins?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, that makes 2 of us.
Bright won't do it?
Nope.
Who's out in LaGrange?
Who's out in LaGrange?
I would Google pest inspectors in LaGrange.
Okay. I mean, I've tried to, you know, and they've come up with the names, but yeah, it didn't come from LaGrange. I know you had a big log cabin out there on Ballard School Road.
Yeah.
The street I grew up on. Yeah.
I don't know if they had a termite inspection done on it or not. Yeah, I think they did.
I
I'll have to
sold
go back to my records and see who it was.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that. What'd you say?
I said I had a log cabin I sold last year in Spencer County for $350, and I have an inspector I could refer you. His name is Blaine. I have to look at the card, but I'll photograph it and send it to you.
I bet you sold that to my neighbor 3 doors down.
Good. That's awesome.
Okay, sounds
But
good.
he did inspect it, and I can photograph the business card. I still have it in the file.
I could have sworn Bright used to do them because I've had him look at carpenter bees and carpenter ants, and that surprises me they don't do them anymore.
Okay.
Huh. All right. Seller's agency disclosure is just like the buyer agency disclosure. There's a termination and release of contract form. And now it has the earnest money deposit amount and who it's held by. So there's no misunderstanding on who's holding the check. So if you have an older form, please throw it away and use this one. If we're holding the check, it sure makes it a whole lot easier when Bill can look up and say, held by Weichert. That would be good. And keep in mind, while we're talking about this form, if the buyer and seller are at odds as to whether or not the money should be returned, try to suggest splitting it. Oftentimes, rather than people locking up and saying, I want all of it or none of it, sometimes you can split it. Everybody walks away somewhat happy and you move on with life. So keep in mind you have an alternative there. This is a really great form. This is not the newer one, but this will suffice. We have a prettier one now, but this information is often requested by the buyer. So what? It's in the packet. Have your seller pull their past LG&E bills. If they don't want to do it by the month, you know, just go down to the bottom and do total or average, however you want to use it, but people are always asking. Vacation information. If you're going on a vacation, fill out that form just so we know who's covering for you. It's nothing worse than we get a phone call over the weekend or after hours and we don't know that you're gone. So please use that form. And then this one, the last one. Good timing because I'm starting to sound like Vicki now. I don't think people are using this form, but it's here if you want it. Again, it's supposed to just alleviate liability. And if the house is not in a condition the buyer expects, you have the right to write it all down and have the seller fix it. And how many days to get it done. So keep this form with you at all times too. You never know when you might need it.
Well, this is a form. This is a very important form. I mean, I don't always use it every single time, but I'm going to tell you, there are certain transactions when your gut just knows there could be something after the fact. And when you cover this base and you get them to sign this, you have a much better chance of this not coming through because it kind of finalizes it. We've gone through, we've looked at it, we've checked it out. Here's your signature. And you know, everybody's got a copy of it. It just really kind of lets everybody know, hey, we're all on the same page and we got a document to back it up.
Keep in mind that it isn't necessarily going to negate something that wasn't fixed properly or something that you couldn't see with your naked eye. Say, for example, you were supposed to have flashing fixed. You
Right.
can't get up there and physically see it. So this is not going to negate the fact that you have waived your right to having all of those repairs made again or fixed or whatever. So understand, make sure the buyer understands that that's not the purpose of this. It's the purpose of it is that first of all, you prove you did a walkthrough. And secondly, if there's an issue, you can write it down and present it to the seller and have them sign it.
Preferably before closing.
Yeah, that'd be good. But if not, doing it at closing is good as well. There's been times where we would just hand write stuff at the closing table.
Yeah.
Because we were doing it in front of an attorney or having the attorney
Right.
do it.
Right. True too.
Notice it says the buyers refuse to close until the issues are resolved. That may not be something you can do. So you have an option to do it within so many days. And I would probably add, if it were expensive, that X dollars will be held in an escrow account until such repairs are made. And if they aren't done within that time frame, the buyer gets all the money. You could write that in the body of this up here. That's all I've got. Anybody have any questions, comments? Helpful, not helpful?
Do we have a COVID-19 form?
Yeah, it was on there.
We went over that one? Okay. No, I think we got them all.
COVID-19. It's the GLAR one. You're welcome to use KYRs. I don't really care. Indiana has a nice one too. But if you feel more comfortable using one, there's one right there.
Okay.
Good deal.
That one was designed by the Borders as well.
Yeah.
Vicki, I just sent you the card for BCPC exterminating for the log cabin.
If you could send it to Jane Roberts, that would be even better.
Oh, who am I sent? Is this Vicki?
It's Jane.
Oh, pardon me. I'm sorry. Is that who wanted it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, it's Blaine Wilcutt with BCPC Exterminating, and they will do it. So I photographed the card and sent it to you. Jane, I'm sorry. I thought it was Vicki.
It's all right.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks very much.
At the top of this, under documents, I was on forms. I clicked on forms, but this is the main page that pops up, and you'll notice there are your packets. So you can print the entire listing or sales packet from there. The getting to know you. The entire lead-based paint booklet is there if you need to print it. The policy and procedures. And then the bottom one is the PowerPoint that I just did on relocation. So anyone that is curious about that can watch that PowerPoint. I think that pretty much covers everything. But again, I was on Office on Weichert Works. Unless you all have anything else you want to ask me, I'm going to sign off and go back to work. We good?
Okay. Sounds good. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Y'all have a great day.
All right. Bye.
Bye.